My son laughed, looking at me across a table laden with champagne glasses. Dad, what's it like to know you're hopelessly behind the times? His hip, successful friends around him chuckled. Everyone except me. I just smiled slowly and asked, and how does it feel to know that this out-of-touch dinosaur will no longer be paying for your ultra-modern lifestyle? The moment those words left my mouth, my son's face turned pale, and the celebratory dinner table turned into a battlefield. You won't believe what he did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. You know, Dad, my son Leo said, lazily swirling a glass of Veuve Clicquot. Retirement must be a wonderful thing. No pressure, no deadlines, no real responsibility. I carefully set down my fork. The piece of perfectly cooked ribeye seemed to instantly grow cold on my plate. We were in his penthouse, flooded with the lights of the city skyline pouring through floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, radiant in a designer dress I was sure cost more than my monthly pension, had thrown this party to celebrate Leo's latest triumph. His new crypto portfolio management app had taken off, making him, in his own words, the king of the new economy. It has its moments, I replied, watching him take a generous gulp of the champagne. The very same champagne I had brought as a congratulatory gift. Leo leaned back in his chair of chrome and white leather, the chair at the head of the massive, single-slab wood table, where he now preferred to sit during our rare family gatherings. I don't mean to offend you. You had a decent run as an architect, but that was what? 20 years ago? It's a different world now, Dad. Everything is digital, fast-paced. It takes a young, agile mind to truly succeed. My granddaughter Mia, only 10, looked up at me from her tablet. She was sitting next to me, and I could feel her tense up. Leo, your father had a wonderful career, Sarah chimed in, more out of politeness than conviction. He designed buildings that are still standing all over the state. Sure. Leo waved his hand dismissively. But let's be honest. When was the last time you actually built something? Accomplished something significant? My grandson Noah, 12, looked up from his smartphone. Grandpa built me a Lego model of the Tower Bridge. It's really cool. That's sweet, son, Leo said, patting his head patronizingly. But Grandpa needs to understand that real men provide for their families with their own brains and hard work. Not everyone can just coast through retirement while others carry the weight. The silence at the table grew uncomfortably long. Sarah's nervous laugh filled the void. Maybe we should talk about something else. Mia, tell Grandpa about your robotics project. But Leo wasn't finished. Success had inflated his ego to the size of a blimp, and the champagne had made him bold. Actually, I've been thinking, now that I'm making real money, 8 figures, Dad, maybe it's time for everyone to start pulling their own weight. I knew exactly what he meant. 10 years of help with the mortgage on this penthouse, paying for the kid's private STEM school, covering his debts after 2 failed startups, funding Sarah's career as a lifestyle influencer. 10 years I had silently watched him burn through money while I quietly covered the shortfalls. Take Sarah, for instance, he continued, gesturing toward his wife. She's been out of the real workforce for so long, living off, well, let's call it a family subsidy. Maybe it's time she got back into the real world. Sarah's face went pale. She knew, as I did, that their lifestyle depended entirely on my quiet support. The expensive school uniforms hanging in the closet, the lease on his Tesla Plaid, the $100,000 kitchen renovation they'd completed last summer. All of it was impossible without my help. Noah sensed the tension. Dad, are we in trouble? No, son. But it's important to understand the difference between earners and dependents. Between providers and, he looked directly at me, those who have given up and are just existing. The insult hung in the air like cheap cigar smoke. Mia looked down. Noah fidgeted in his seat. Leo leaned forward, emboldened by what he mistook for my silence. I don't mean to be harsh, Dad, but someone has to ask the hard questions. When was the last time you made a meaningful contribution? When was the last time you felt the satisfaction of earning your own way, instead of just coasting? He paused for effect, savoring what he believed was his moment of triumph. How does it feel to be a failure? The question landed like a slap. Sarah gasped. Noah's fork clattered against his plate. Mia looked ready to cry, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I took a slow sip of water, set the glass down precisely, and looked Leo directly in the eyes. "How does it feel?" I said, my voice steady and clear. "To know this failure will no longer be paying your bills?" The color drained from Leo's face faster than champagne from a broken bottle. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The children stared in confusion, watching their father's triumphant expression crumble into something approaching panic. I silently returned to my steak, cutting each piece with deliberate precision while the table was plunged into stunned silence. Outside, darkness was settling over the city, and somewhere below, in the world of real people, sirens wailed. The 15-minute drive home in my old but reliable Volvo was spent in absolute silence. My hands were steady on the wheel, despite the storm raging inside me. I pulled into my driveway, and the motion sensor light illuminated the steps of the modest 2-story house I had built for my late wife, Emily, and me almost 40 years ago. Inside, I hung my coat in the hall closet and walked directly to my study. The room smelled of old paper, wood, and furniture polish. I switched on the brass desk lamp, its warm glow illuminating rows of perfectly organized folders and blueprints. As a retired architect, I kept everything, every receipt, every bank statement, every canceled check. It was time to see exactly what my status as a failure had cost me. I pulled open the first drawer of a metal filing cabinet labeled Leo and Sarah, 2013 to 2016. The folders were color-coded: blue for mortgage, green for auto loans and leases, yellow for education, Mia and Noah, red for medical bills, and black, the thickest one, for business support and debt coverage. My wife Emily passed away at the end of 2012, and by the spring of 2013, Leo had come to me. His first startup, a social network for pet lovers, had failed, leaving him with $70,000 in debt. "It's temporary, Dad," he had said. "I just need to regroup. The next project will be a hit, I promise." I found the statement, a wire transfer for $70,000 in April 2013. Next to it was the mortgage folder. They had just bought the penthouse, banking on Leo's future success. The first payment I made for them was $4,500 in June 2013, and so it went every month. I spread the statements across my large drafting table. The numbers formed neat columns under the lamplight. For $1,500 every single month for 128 months. My calculator showed $576,000 in mortgage assistance alone. Next came the cars. The lease on a Tesla Model S, then a Model X for Sarah, and now the Plaid. An average of $1,800 a month for 8 years. Another $172,800. The numbers climbed steadily. Each folder revealed another layer of generosity I had almost forgotten myself. The tuition receipts for the Silicon Valley Junior Genius Academy filled an entire drawer. Noah's education from pre-K through 7th grade. Mia's from nursery through 5th. An elite academy with robotics labs and advanced Mandarin classes. $35,000 per year for each child. Over 8 years, that was $560,000. Premium medical insurance when Leo was between projects. Dental work for the kids, including Noah's braces. Visits to top specialists. Each manila envelope contained hundreds of copay receipts, insurance forms, and bills I had quietly covered. About $12,000 a year for 10 years, another $120,000. I found vacation receipts tucked behind insurance papers. A trip to Hawaii in 2017. A ski resort in Aspen for Christmas 2019. A summer vacation in Europe in 2021, which Sarah had documented extensively on her blog under the hashtag #hardworkpaysoff. That was another $80,000 or so. And, of course, the black box. Leo's second failed startup, a platform for trading and used gift cards. Another $50,000 loss. Covering their credit card debt when their spending spiraled out of control again and again. Another roughly $65,000 over the years. The final tally made me lean back in my leather chair. $1,693,800. Nearly $1.7 million. For the first time since Emily's funeral, I felt the full weight of the promise I had made at her bedside. "Don't worry about Leo," I had whispered to my dying wife. "I'll make sure he's okay." I remembered Leo's tears at the funeral, his panic about the future. I remembered how grateful Sarah had been back then, calling the ones showing my own sacrifices. The smaller retirement account because I was constantly investing in Leo. The modest house instead of the ocean view condo I dreamed of. The 15-year-old Volvo in my garage, while Leo swapped one Tesla for another. The travel brochures I'd collected but never used because Leo and Sarah always had some emergency. I had given them not just nearly $2 million. I had given them 10 years of my own dreams. At 10:30 p.m., I reached for my phone and my bank's contact list. Tomorrow would bring some very interesting conversations with the automatic payment departments. Sunday morning coffee tasted different somehow. Stronger. I sat at my kitchen table watching sparrows fight over crumbs outside my window, then returned to my study, where neat stacks of documents waited like soldiers ready for deployment. First up was Bank of America. They answered on the third ring. Account services, this is Jennifer. How may I help you? Hello. I would like to cancel all automatic transfers from my checking account. Number 7712-58-. My voice was as steady and confident as it had been for 40 years of architectural presentations. May I have the last 4 digits of your social security number for verification? The process took 12 minutes. Jennifer was thorough, professional, and completely unaware that with each keystroke, she was dismantling a decade-long financial architecture. The mortgage payment to Leo and Sarah Bennett for $1,500 has been canceled. The payment to Silicon Valley Junior Genius Academy, $5,800, has been canceled. The payment to Tesla Financial Services, $1,850, has been canceled. All those payments are now discontinued, Mr. Bennett. Is there anything else I can help you with today? That's all, thank you. A checkmark next to the first item on my list. Next was Chase Bank, where their credit cards, which I regularly topped up, were linked. This required speaking to a supervisor. Canceling the medical insurance payments with Blue Shield was surprisingly easy. Each call followed the same pattern: polite verification, efficient processing, confirmation numbers that I dutifully recorded in my notebook. By 11:15 a.m., I had crossed 8 items off my list. The phone rang at 11:47 a.m. Dad. Leo's voice was more confused than panicked. Not yet. Something weird happened with our mortgage. The bank sent an alert that the automatic payment, which was supposed to go through today, failed due to insufficient funds from the payer's account. But that makes no sense, because you assumed I would pay for it forever? I finished for him. The silence on the line stretched like a taut wire. What do you mean? His voice climbed half an octave. Exactly what I said Saturday night. I am no longer covering your expenses. But, Dad, you can't just... The mortgage, the school, the lease, all of it has been discontinued as of this morning. I could hear his breathing quicken. He was in his car. I could make out the sound of the navigator in the background. Is this some kind of joke? We'll lose the house. Then you'll have to figure out how to pay for it yourself. The line went dead. My notebook showed 6 more calls to make. The utility companies were surprisingly efficient. The accounting department at the Junior Genius Academy asked fewer questions than I expected. Each confirmation number was logged with mechanical precision. Leo called back at 12:23 p.m. His voice was now tight with genuine fear. Dad, please, I don't understand what's happening. The school called. The leasing company called. Even American Express. They're all saying our payments were declined. Because I canceled the automatic transfers from my accounts. Your accounts. The question came out as a whisper. Did you think the money materialized out of thin air, Leo? Another silence. A long one, filled with the sound of a world crumbling. But we never asked you to. You never asked because you never had to. I just did it. We can't afford this. He stopped himself. Yes, I said. That's the whole point. At 12:31 p.m., the phone rang again. This time it was Sarah. Her voice was full of the forced authority she probably used with service staff. Eric, whatever game you and Leo are playing, it needs to stop right now. Mia and Noah should not have to suffer because of your male ego. This isn't a game, Sarah. It's reality. You're destroying our family because your feelings got hurt at dinner. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply stopping my financial support. You wanted to be seen as a successful influencer? Figure out how to monetize that success on your own. Her silence lasted longer than Leo's. The final call on my list was to my financial advisor. On Monday morning, We would discuss redirecting those monthly payments into my long-neglected travel investment fund. Outside, the sparrows had found more crumbs. At 1:15 p.m., the familiar, silent hum of the Tesla Plaid pulling into my driveway broke the afternoon quiet. Through my living room window, I watched Leo fly out of the car, slamming the door with unnecessary force, while Sarah emerged from the passenger seat, clutching her Chanel purse like a lifeline. They marched up my walkway with the determined stride of people convinced they held the moral high ground. I opened the door before they could knock. "We need to talk," Leo said, pushing past me without an invitation. Sarah followed, her eyes red-rimmed. "Please, come in," I said to their backs. Leo positioned himself in the center of my living room like a general claiming territory. "This ridiculous tantrum of yours ends now. You will call every single bank and restore every single payment." "No, I won't." His face flushed crimson. "You can't just cut us off without warning. There are legal obligations. Verbal contracts. Show me the contract where I agreed to pay your bills forever, Leo." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Dad, please, think about what Mom would want. Remember what you promised her before she passed." The mention of Emily hit like a cold wind. But I had expected this tactic. "I promised to help you get on your feet, Leo. 10 years and almost $2 million later. You're less stable than the day we buried her." $2 million. Sarah's whisper barely carried across the room. I walked to my desk, retrieved my calculator and notebook. $1,693,800. Mortgage, car leases, insurance, private school, medical bills, vacations, covering your startup debts. Should I break it down by category? Leo's bluster faltered for exactly 3 seconds. That's impossible. We never asked for that much. You never asked for anything. You simply expected it." Sarah sank onto my couch, her face as pale as a sheet. "But the children, Mia and Noah's school, their activities, their school will be paid for. Their activities, their clothes, their medical expenses, as well. But I will be paying for them directly from now on. No more money flowing through you and Sarah. You can't divide the family like that." Leo snapped. "We're a unit, a team. Teams require mutual respect, Leo. When was the last time either of you thanked me for anything?" The question hung unanswered in the afternoon air. Sarah's tears started slowly, then built to the desperate sobs I remembered from her teenage years. I didn't know it was that much. I thought you wanted to help. I thought it made you happy. It did, until you stopped appreciating it and started demanding it." Leo began pacing my carpet again, like a caged animal. "Fine. You want gratitude? Thank you. There. Now restore the payments." "Gratitude doesn't work retroactively, Leo." His pacing stopped. For the first time since he had entered my house, he looked genuinely worried, not just angry. "What exactly do you want from us?" "I want you to learn to live within your means. I want my grandchildren to see their parents working for what they have, instead of expecting handouts. I want to be treated like a father and a grandfather, not an ATM." Sarah looked up at me through her tears. "What if we can't? What if we lose everything? Then you'll learn what it actually feels like to be a failure." The silence stretched until even the afternoon shadows seemed to hold their breath. Leo straightened his shoulders, retrieving some of his corporate composure. "We'll see about this. There are lawyers who specialize in elder financial abuse." I almost smiled. "Please, call them. I'd love to explain how I've been financially abused for 10 years. They left without another word. The roar of the Tesla's engine, revving with more aggression than the electric motor probably appreciated, tore through the quiet of the street. I stood at my window, watching them disappear down the road, and realized my hands were shaking. The silence filled my house like water flooding a breached dam. I collapsed into my leather armchair, the one Emily had given me for our 20th anniversary, and stared at our wedding photo on the mantel. Emily's radiant smile, my own, so full of hope. Back then, I was sure I had built something that would last forever. Only now did I realize the foundation of that structure had been rotting for years. 3 days went by like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Monday morning brought the first official notices from the banks. On Tuesday, Leo and Sarah launched their offensive on the only battlefield where they felt all-powerful, the internet. My friend Frank, with whom I had worked on projects for over 30 years, called me on Tuesday afternoon. "Eric, have you seen what Sarah posted on her Instagram?" I didn't follow her blog, which was called Sarah's Shining Life, but Frank read it to me aloud. It was a long post under a perfectly retouched photo of her looking thoughtful and vulnerable. Sometimes the people closest to you inflict the deepest pain, she wrote. Leo and I are facing a sudden and cruel family crisis that threatens everything we've built. We are being forced to make impossibly difficult decisions for the well-being of our children. Please send us your positive energy and support during this dark time. The post garnered thousands of likes and hundreds of sympathetic comments. Stay strong, guys. Family can be so toxic. Whatever it is, you're strong and you'll get through it. That evening, Leo posted something on his Twitter where he had over 50,000 followers in the tech world. Lesson of the day: never let the previous generation's success be weaponized against your own. Sometimes you have to cut off the old, rotten roots for the tree to grow. It was more veiled, but for those who knew our family, the implication was clear. By Wednesday, the calls started coming. My cousin Martha from Oregon called, her voice full of concern. "Eric, what's going on? Sarah is writing such awful things. I saw her post. Did you kick them out of their house?" "No, Martha," I answered calmly. "I just stopped paying their $4,500 monthly mortgage, which I've been paying for 10 years. There was a silence on the other end of the line. 10 years. And paying for their kids' private school and their car leases and covering their debts. The grand total is nearly $1.7 million. The silence grew deeper. She didn't mention that. She leaves out a lot of things, Martha." On Thursday, Sarah released a video. She was sitting on the floor of their luxurious living room, makeup-free, with tear-streaked eyes. "Hey guys, I just wanted to come on and thank you for all your support," she sobbed into the camera. "The last few days have been a living hell. We had to tell the children they might not be able to go back to their school after the break. Seeing the fear in their eyes is the most horrible thing for any mother." The video went viral in our local community. People shared it on Facebook with angry comments directed at me. What a heartless grandfather. Money is more important than his grandkids? Shame on him. I started getting recognized at the grocery store. People would give me sideways, judgmental glances. Mrs. Henderson from across the street ostentatiously crossed to the other side when she saw me on my morning walk. On Friday, Leo gave a more candid interview on some tech podcast. "We're going through a process of financial uncoupling from the older generation," he pontificated with the air of an expert on family psychology. "It's a painful but necessary step for many millennials whose boomer parents can't accept their success and use financial control as a form of emotional abuse." He was brilliant in his demagoguery. He had turned his infantile dependency into a trendy social phenomenon. He had painted me not just as a bad father, but as a repressive symbol of a bygone era. On Saturday morning, I sat in my study, looking at printouts of their posts and the comments. My anger had given way to a cold, crystalline clarity. They didn't just want the money. They wanted to justify their lifestyle by rewriting history, casting me as the villain so they could remain the heroes of their own drama. I wasn't going to play their game. I wouldn't engage in a social media spat, but I was preparing my own response. I opened my old architectural chest, pulled out several large sheets of vellum, and my drafting tools. If Leo wanted to speak the language of the new world, I would answer him in the language of my own, the language of structures, facts, and irrefutable proof. I began to draw, not a building, but a diagram, the architecture of their debt. On Monday morning, I called Frank. "Frank, I need your help. Can you come over this afternoon?" "Sure, Eric. Anything big. I just want to show you a project." When Frank arrived, I laid out 3 huge sheets of drawing paper on the big table in the living room. They looked like a master plan, but instead of buildings and roads, they were covered with charts and graphs and numbers. "What the hell is that?" Frank asked, putting on his reading glasses. "This, my friend," I said, "is the architecture of truth." The first sheet, titled Foundation, Mortgage and Housing, was a timeline from 2013 to 2023. Arrows extended from it, pointing to each of the 128 $4,500 mortgage payments. The total, $576,000, was circled in red. Listed next to it were the utilities and property taxes I'd been covering in the early years. The second sheet was called Infrastructure, Education and Transportation. There were 2 parallel lines for Mia and Noah, detailing every payment for private school tuition summer camp, and extracurricular activities. The education total was $560,000. Below that was a chart of the lease payments on their Teslas, $172,800. The third sheet, the most complex, was called Communications and Incidentals. It looked like a spider's web. In the center was the word credit card and business debt, with dozens of lines radiating out from it, showing the dates and amounts I'd transferred to cover their overspending and failed startups. There was a section for Sarah's blog called Brand Investments, where I'd listed the cost of camera equipment I'd bought her, trips to influencer conferences, and even account promotion services. Frank studied the diagrams for about 10 minutes. He ran his finger over the total at the bottom of the third sheet, $1,623,800. He took off his glasses and looked at me. And they call you a villain? They call it financial abuse, I chuckled. Can I take a picture of this? Frank asked. That's why I called you here. Frank took several clear pictures of each sheet of paper with his phone. What are you going to do with this? Nothing, but you can do whatever you want with this. The next day, Frank went to his weekly lunch with other retired businessmen and engineers at a local golf club. Among them was Bill Harrison, whose son was in Noah's class. Bill was lamenting how expensive the elite school was and mentioning that some people seemed to be greedy for money, a reference to Leo and Sarah and their social media videos. Frank didn't argue. He just pulled out his phone. You know, Bill, it's funny. Eric was showing me the architecture of his spending on his son's family the other day. It's quite an interesting project. He showed Bill the photos. By the end of lunch, the architecture of debt photos were on half the golf club's phones. By Tuesday evening, the rumors were spreading. It wasn't an explosion like Leo and Sarah's posts, but a slow trickle. The truth, written in blueprints, was undeniable. It contained no emotion, only facts. On Wednesday, Sarah walked into her favorite coffee shop, where the barista, who usually greeted her with a broad smile, was noticeably cold. At the next table, two women from their school's PTA were sitting. As Sarah passed, they fell silent and pointedly stared at their phones. On Thursday, Leo called me. There was no anger or panic in his voice, just cold fury. What have you done? Me? I was just showing my friend my calculations. Didn't you say on your podcast that you need to be transparent about your finances? You're humiliating us. You've made a fool of us. No, Leo. I'm just providing context. You told your side of the story, I told mine. Let people decide for themselves whose architecture is more sound. On Friday evening, Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had crossed the street, called me. Eric, she said sheepishly. My husband was out to dinner at the golf club. I saw those plans. I want to apologize for my behavior. I didn't know the whole story. It's okay, Helen. People tend to believe what's most dramatic. By the end of the week, the tide of public opinion that had risen so quickly against me was beginning to recede, crashing against a breakwater of facts and figures. Sympathy for Leo and Sarah had turned to bewilderment, then to quiet contempt. Their toxic dad story was crumbling under the weight of nearly 2 million reasons why it was a lie. They wanted to wage war on social media, but I brought the battlefield to my turf, the drawing board. And on that turf, I have never lost. Reality, unlike Instagram followers, cannot be swayed by sob stories and does not take sides. It simply exists, obeying relentless laws, like gravity. And for Leo and Sarah, gravity began to assert itself with terrifying force. The first major blow was the official foreclosure notice, taped to their designer front door last Friday. The bright orange sticker on the minimalist gray door looked like a screaming insult to their curated taste. They had 30 days to pay 3 months of missed mortgage payments plus penalties and legal fees, a sum approaching $20,000. On Monday morning, while Mia and Noah were at school, a tow truck pulled up to their building. Not a regular one for illegally parked cars, but a slick, professional one from Tesla Financial Services. A polite but firm man in a uniform presented Leo with a repossession order for the Tesla Plaid due to non-payment. I heard about it from Frank, who happened to be driving by. According to him, Leo tried to argue, shouting something about his credit score and his public profile, but the man just shrugged and got to work. 10 minutes later, the fastest production car in the world was loaded onto a flatbed and slowly driven away, leaving behind an empty parking space and a humiliated owner. By Wednesday, Their credit cards were being declined one by one. Sarah tried to pay for groceries at Whole Foods, but her American Express Platinum card was rejected. Then her Visa Gold. She had to abandon a full cart of organic produce and walk out empty-handed, under the sympathetic and, in some cases, gloating stares of other shoppers. That evening, they had their first major fight that the neighbors could hear. Mrs. Henderson, now firmly my ally again, discreetly told me she heard shouting through the open windows. Leo was accusing Sarah of exorbitant spending. Sarah was screaming that he was the one who had promised her a fairy tale life, and that it was his failed startups that had eaten their savings. On Thursday, Sarah began selling off her treasures. Ads appeared on a local Facebook group. Chanel boy bag, perfect condition, barely used, for $1,500. Christian Louboutin heels, size 8, $600. Cartier love bracelet, urgent, $5,000. For a community that had been sympathizing with her family drama a week ago, this fire sale was the final nail in the coffin of their reputation. The comments were biting. Wow, that could pay for a couple of months of mortgage. Tough times, huh? On Friday, a letter arrived from the school. If the outstanding tuition of nearly $18,000 was not paid within 10 days, Mia and Noah would be unenrolled. This was the heaviest blow. The children were their last trump card, their human shield in this war. And now that shield was cracking. On Saturday, I deliberately drove to the mall where I knew a large pawn shop was located. And I saw them. Leo was standing at the entrance, turned away, trying to preserve some shred of dignity. Sarah was inside, at the counter. She was taking off her Rolex wedding watch and handing it to the appraiser. Her face wore an expression of utter devastation. They were no longer the golden couple from the penthouse. They were just two desperate people, trying to sell the fragments of their broken dream to survive one more day. They had ignored the laws of financial gravity for too long, living in an artificial weightlessness that I had created for them. But now my support was gone, and they were falling. Fast. And the ground was coming up to meet them. That night, Noah called me. Grandpa. His voice was small and scared. Mom and Dad are yelling again. Really loud. What are they arguing about, buddy? Money. Dad said we might have to move. To an apartment. And that Mia and I will have to go to a normal school. Grandpa, is that true? Sometimes things change in life. Noah, I said gently. But I will always be here for you and Mia, no matter what. Dad said, he said it's all your fault. That you ruined everything on purpose. A pause. And then Mom started crying and said, maybe we ruined it ourselves? Monday evening was quiet and cool. I was sitting in my study, looking over the blueprints of an old project, a library I had designed for the university 30 years ago. It had logic, structure, harmony, everything that was so lacking in my current family life. At 8:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was a soft, almost hesitant ring. It was so unlike Leo, who usually pressed the bell as if he were storming a fortress. I opened the door. He was standing on the porch, alone. His usual designer t-shirt was wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes, and in his hands, he held not a smartphone, but a simple paper folder. His shoulders were slumped, and his entire posture screamed fatigue and defeat. Eric, he began, not calling me Dad for the first time in years. I need to talk to you. Man to man. I stepped aside, letting him into the house. We walked to the living room, the same room where 2 weeks ago he had demanded I restore the payments. He didn't pace the room, but sank heavily into the armchair opposite mine. He placed the folder on his lap, but didn't open it. The foreclosure notice isn't a bluff, he began quietly, staring at his hands. We have 23 days. I went to the bank today, tried to get a loan, to restructure the debt. They laughed in my face. My credit history, which I thought was flawless, turned out to be entirely dependent on your payments. Without them, I'm nobody. Just a guy with massive debts and no stable income. He took a deep breath. Sarah sold almost all of her bags and jewelry. We scraped together about $30,000. It's not even enough for half the mortgage debt, let alone the school. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were devoid of their former arrogance. There was only a scorched desert. I printed out our bank statements for the last 5 years. And then, I looked at your blueprints, the ones Bill Harrison forwarded to me. I sat with a calculator for 3 hours. You were wrong. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. It's not $1.7 million. It's closer to $1.90 if you factor in inflation and the small expenses you didn't include. He opened his folder. It was filled with printouts, covered in his own notes. He had done something I never expected. He had conducted his own investigation. He had checked the facts. I didn't come here to ask you to turn everything back on. His voice cracked slightly. I came to ask how? How did you do it? How did you manage to support all of us and still live your own life? I always thought I was the financial genius. But today I realized I was just a spoiled child playing with his father's money. It was the most honest confession I had ever heard from him. I always thought I was building something of my own, he continued, staring into space. My brand, my success, my family. But none of it was mine. The foundation was yours. The walls were yours. The roof was yours. I was just putting up expensive wallpaper and hanging trendy art. He looked at me again, and there were tears in his eyes. Not tears of self-pity, but of bitter, belated realization. I've ruined everything. With my pride, my stupidity, I've lost the house, the respect, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose my children. He fell silent, swallowing a lump in his throat. What do I do, Dad? He asked in a whisper, and that one word, Dad, held more respect and desperation than all his loud toasts over the last 10 years. Not how do we get back to the old life, but how do we survive in the new one? Is there even a way forward? Outside, the streetlights came on, carving the contours of my quiet, stable world out of the darkness. A world he had so long despised, and which now seemed to be his only salvation. He had raised the white flag, and I had to decide whether to accept his surrender. I let him speak, without interruption. Every word he spoke was a brick in the foundation of something new, something that could become a real, not a fake, relationship. When he fell silent, the room was filled with a thick quiet of awkwardness and anticipation. There is a way forward, Leo, I finally said, my voice even. But it won't be easy, and it will be on my terms. He nodded, ready to listen. He looked like a drenched, freezing traveler who had finally reached shelter and was willing to do anything for warmth and safety. First, and most importantly, I began, holding up one finger. I will ensure the complete security and stability of Mia and Noah. I will pay their tuition at the Junior Genius Academy until they graduate. I will directly pay for all their medical expenses, clothing, sports sections, and activities. I will establish a trust fund for each of them for their college education, and by the time they turn 18, there will be enough in them for any Ivy League university. Relief washed over his face, so deep and sincere that he seemed to physically relax in the chair. But I raised a second finger, and his face tensed up again. Not 1 cent for your lifestyle. Not for a mortgage. Not for rent. Not for cars. Not for restaurants. Not for Sarah's clothes. Not for your future, brilliant projects. You and Sarah will live on what you actually earn. Period. He nodded slowly. I understand. I'm already looking for a job. A real job. With a salary and a schedule. Third, I continued, you will lose that penthouse. Trying to save it is trying to hold on to an illusion. You need to let it go. You will have to find housing you can afford. A modest apartment. A townhouse in the suburbs. I don't care. But you will pay for it yourselves. Yes, I understand that, he said quietly. And fourth, the hardest part. I demand a public admission. Full and unconditional. Leo's head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean that you both, you and Sarah, will write posts on the very same social media platforms where you drag my name through the mud. You will tell the truth. You will write about the 10 years of my financial support. You will mention the amount. You will apologize for the lies and slander. You will delete all your previous posts and videos on this topic. Leo's face went pale. Dad, that's humiliating. It will kill my reputation. Your reputation is already dead, Leo. Not because of me, but because of you. You built it on a lie, and it collapsed like a house of cards. You have a chance to build a new one, on a foundation of truth. It will be painful. It will be humiliating. But it's the only way to come clean. You must apologize not just to me, but to all the people you deceived. He was silent, staring at the floor. I could see the battle raging within him between the remnants of his pride and his instinct for self-preservation. And lastly, I said, softening my tone, I want us to be a family. Once a month, all of you will come to my house for dinner. Not to report on your finances, but to talk. so Mia and Noah can see that their father and grandfather can sit at the same table and respect each other. So we can relearn how to be a family. I leaned back in my chair. Those are my terms. All or nothing. You can't just pick the parts about the kids and ignore the public apology. It's a package deal. He sat motionless for several minutes. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, weighing the price of his pride against the price of his children's future. Finally, he looked up. I agree. To all of it. But I don't know if Sarah will agree. For her, her public image, it's everything. You have 48 hours to decide. Until noon on Wednesday. If you haven't accepted my terms by then, my offer is rescinded. Completely. And you'll be climbing out of this hole on your own. He slowly stood up. His movements no longer had the energy of a conqueror, only the heavy fatigue of a man facing a very difficult conversation. At the door, he turned back. Dad, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Leo. There's nothing to thank me for. Go and talk to your wife. He left, and I was alone in the silence of my house. I had offered him not just money. I had offered him a roadmap to redemption. But he would have to walk that path himself. And the first, most difficult step was waiting for him at home. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I didn't know what was happening in their penthouse, but I could imagine. The screaming, the tears, the accusations. Sarah's pride was wounded even more deeply than Leo's. Her shining life was built on the illusion of independent success, and to publicly admit that it was all paid for by a father-in-law she despised was, for her, tantamount to social death. On Wednesday, at 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the deadline, a notification popped up on my phone. Sarah had published a new post on Instagram. I opened it with a racing heart. It was a simple photo, their hands, Leo's and hers, clasped together, with no filters or retouching. And below it, the text. I want to offer my deepest and most sincere apologies. The message began. For the past few weeks, my husband and I have been spreading false and unfair information about our father and father-in-law, Eric Bennett. The truth is that for over a decade, Eric has been the sole support of our family. He paid for our home, our children's education, our debts, and our lifestyle, spending nearly $2 million to do so. We took his generosity for granted, and when it stopped, we responded with ingratitude and slander. There are no words to express our shame and regret. We ask for forgiveness from Eric, from our children, and from everyone we misled. We are deleting all previous content related to this topic and beginning the long journey of earning back forgiveness and learning to stand on our own feet. Almost simultaneously, Leo published a similar text on his Twitter. Short, clear, without any spin. It was a public, unconditional self-immolation. It was exactly what I had demanded. I called the bank and arranged to wire the funds directly to the school. Then I contacted a lawyer and began the process of setting up trust funds for the grandchildren. 3 months later, on a Sunday evening, they were sitting at my dinner table. They had lost the penthouse and moved into a modest townhouse 20 miles out of the city. Leo had found a job in the IT department of a large insurance company, not as glamorous as startups, but stable. Sarah had gotten a job as an administrator at a dental clinic. They arrived in a 10-year-old Ford Escape they had bought with cash after selling the last remnants of their former luxury. Mia was chattering excitedly about her new school programming project. Noah was showing me the trophy his soccer team had won in the city tournament. They were happy. Their world had gotten smaller, but much more real. Dad, here's our budget for next month, Leo said, handing me a sheet from a notepad. We're making it work. We even managed to put $200 into an emergency fund. He spoke about it with a quiet pride I had never heard in his voice when he boasted about million-dollar deals. Sarah placed an apple pie she had baked herself on the table. It's not like Mom's, of course, she said shyly, but I tried. We ate the pie and talked about simple things, school grades, their upcoming vacation, which they planned to spend camping by a lake because it was all they could afford. There were no more conversations about cryptocurrencies, venture funds, or the latest social media trends. It was the conversation of a family. Before they left, as I was hugging my grandchildren goodbye, Mia whispered quietly in my ear, "Grandpa, I'm glad we live in the new house now. Dad and Mom don't yell anymore." I watched their old Ford disappear into the night. I didn't feel the triumph of a victor. I felt the peace of an architect looking at a completed building. I hadn't just destroyed their fake world. I had forced them to pick up the tools and start building their own on the ruins of the old one. This time, on a solid foundation of truth, work, and respect. And this building, I knew, would stand. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.